What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. Colby Covington 15-2 versus former champ Tyron Woodley 19-5-1. And notice how I'm phrasing the matchup, Covington versus Woodley. Because 2 years ago, this would have been one of the best fights you could make in the UFC, across any division. And that would have obviously been billed as Tyron Woodley versus Colby Covington, UFC welterweight champion versus challenger. And without hesitation here, I'd have to favor Colby in this one today. That's because Tyron Woodley has not looked good in his last two fights, versus Usman, where he lost his title, then versus Gilbert Burns, where he lost serious contender status. He was just outworked and outgunned by both guys. Usman grinded him down with his style of MMA wrestling, including takedowns and working from the clinch. He just dominated Tyron over the course of 5 rounds. And Woodley got outstruck versus Gilbert Burns, an elite BJJ specialist turned MMA fighter, and the upcoming challenger for Usman's title. Burns won all 5 rounds versus Woodley and almost stopped him a couple of times. Now, once upon a time, Woodley won his UFC title late in his career. He was 34 when he became champ. He'd already had a solid Strikeforce career and ended up challenging for the championship there, but lost that to Nate Marquardt. This was 2012, 8 years ago. He moves to the UFC, splits his first 2 fights, a win and a loss, the loss coming to Jake Shields, who you might remember challenging for the UFC title before that. Good wrestling, great jiu-jitsu. I'd also understand if you would verbally reverse those. Great wrestling, good jiu-jitsu. Shields was actually a Strikeforce champ, and an Elite XC champ. And a Shuto champ. So Tyron Woodley comes out of the Shields loss by knocking out Josh Koscheck and Carlos Condit, both top contenders in their day. Condit was actually a very successful champ, defending it a few times in the WEC. He was also an interim champ in the UFC when he beat Nate Diaz, but never a full UFC champ. So Woodley knocks these just outside of their prime badasses out, and then he loses to Rory MacDonald, who around that time was kind of seen to be the likely heir to GSP's throne. They're also both Canadian, and MacDonald was super young and just seemed to have all of the skills and know how to put them together. His stand-up boxing and Muay Thai, dope, sharp. Wrestling and jiu-jitsu, he could perform well there depending on the opponent's skill level. Rory was looking like that dude, but eventually ended up losing to Robbie Lawler twice, the second in an all-time classic. But just before that second MacDonald lost to Lawler, he was riding high, looking great. And Tyron Woodley was one of his wins, and it came via decision. After the MacDonald loss, Tyron then goes on another mini run, knocking Dong Kim out, decisioning Kelvin Gastelum before Gastelum jumped up to 185. Then Tyron gets his UFC title opportunity versus champ Robbie Lawler. Knocks Lawler out in the first round in dramatic fashion. Wins the belt. Tyron Woodley used to look like a pouncing jaguar when he struck. Explosion like you wouldn't believe, and with faster hands than almost all the welterweights. Johnny Hendricks used to have pretty fast hands and powerful hands too. Woodley then defends the title successfully 4 times with 3 wins and 1 draw, the last win coming via stoppage over then surging talent Darren Till, before finally losing the title to Kamaru Usman. And it was in those 4 title defenses that the public seemingly turned on Woodley. People will point to his fights versus the karate god himself, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, as being so bad and so boring that they ended up kind of souring the public on both fighters. Because I'd argue that even Wonderboy became less interesting to fans after those Woodley fights. And that's even before his KO loss to Showtime Pettis. The crazy part about that is, the first Woodley versus Wonderboy fight was a near instant classic. It's as if the public memory of the first fight got totally wiped and erased by that sleeper of a second fight. I'm simply suggesting that we shouldn't discredit Tyron nor Wonderboy for the performance that they put on that first night, battling for the welterweight title. It was a draw. It just so happens that the second fight between the two was a more calculated and cautious chess match. They'd already earned each other's respect during that first fight. And I feel like they've been punished in the court of public opinion unfairly there. But Woodley eventually loses his title to Kamaru Usman in a way that was so convincing that nobody was calling for any immediate rematch. Probably not even Tyron, though I'd have to go back and look. So he was about 36 when he lost the title, and it's only looked worse since, although against the very top end of the divisional talent. And on the other side of the coin, during Woodley's reign, was this trash-talking, wrestling, boxing badass Colby Covington. And I say boxing, although wrestling's his background, just because he's been performing so well from a boxing stance and administering some boxing-like punishment. And he's actually more controversial than he is recognized as a talent for a lot of the things that he says on social media. And obviously anything Trump related will be controversial. But Colby's best stunt, by the way, before all of this politically driven persona, was giving Star Wars spoilers. What better way to get a lot of people to say F you all at once? Great for marketing though. But that was supposed to be our welterweight super fight. Tyron Woodley versus Colby Covington for Woodley's title. But then the UFC totally stuck it to Colby following his dominant 5-round win over former 155-pound champ Rafael dos Anjos, RDA, by denying Colby a title shot that he was positioned for. He was the next guy up. He had just beaten Damian Maia before that, boxing beautifully, and Maia had just had his title shot. So we're supposed to get this fantastic Tyron Woodley versus Colby Covington showdown, and as Colby's healing after the RDA fight, the UFC is trying to expedite Colby's cage return. Basically saying, hey, I know that we owe you this title shot, but it's got to happen within 3 months. I know, you just went through 5 rounds with RDA, but we won't give you the 6+ months of recovery time that we always give anyone who just went through the full 5 rounds as a fight night main event. I mean, check it out. Colby beats RDA on June 9th, 2018. June 9th. The UFC gives Colby the ultimatum of challenging Woodley for the title on September 8th, just 3 months after a 5-rounder. Colby is about to have nasal surgery, so he asks for more time. They say sorry and move on, giving Darren Till the title shot instead. I thought that was disgraceful for the UFC to do that to Colby. He was next in line, and they moved the goalpost. You cannot overlook the toll that these fights, let alone a complete 5-rounder, takes on these fighters. Colby should have been given the same time to recover before his next battle that every other fighter is given. Now, Colby eventually gets his crack at the title after pasting up a very diminished Robbie Lawler with the hands and also with that controlled, time and energy draining pressure grappling. He gets his title shot after that, only against Kamaru Usman, not Tyron Woodley. Excellent fight, a stand-up battle of skill, will, and attrition between two wrestlers. Watching that style of fight break out between those two fighters, that was a sight to behold. Usman outlasts him, hurting him badly in the 3rd, badly injuring his jaw, and finishing him in the 5th. And those scorecards could have had almost any score imaginable going into the 5th. And understandably so, the fight was that close, very disputed, and in the balance going into the 5th. And this is Colby's first fight back versus Woodley when Woodley's stock is at an all-time low. 2 consecutive losses for the first time in his MMA career, and he's 38 years old. So I've got to favor Colby here. Woodley can always explode on somebody with that cat-quick delivery. I just wonder about his ability to pull the trigger reliably in that split second that you need to be able to pull it. I don't know if his hair trigger fast power punches are at peak levels, nor his ability to exert a ton of round-by-round energy wrestling. Because you'll notice that even the great wrestlers of MMA prefer to stand up and box when they enter their 30s and don't have the same youthful energy that they used to. Look at John Jones, Daniel Cormier, Chris Weidman, Rampage Jackson, Rashad Evans, Yoel Romero. Wrestling is tiring as hell. Khabib has made an absolute art out of it, but he's just entering his 30s, so we'll see if that persists. I think GSP is one of the only elite guys I could think of off the top of my head who did the opposite as he aged. But yeah, Woodley hasn't done a ton of wrestling in a while. He grappled with Till a bit, but that was only after dropping him. He just went down to pound him and then finish him out with the Darce choke. Colby, on the other hand, is still legitimately about that wrestling life. That's bad news for Woodley, man. Here's what I can say. Colby mixes it up. He will box you for entire rounds. If he does a lot of this, Woodley will certainly have his opportunities to launch into explosive counterpunches. The question is whether he can execute on that. I'm thinking there's a good chance. Colby throws a lot of volume. He'll lace you with 3 consecutive jabs and then a cross. He did it against old Maia. He did it against old Lawler. He just did it very effectively for almost 5 rounds versus prime Kamaru Usman. Now, I think that Woodley has scarier hair triggerness and suddenness to his fight-finishing power punches. In fact, I don't really know Usman to have fight-finishing punching power or elite punching delivery. Will Colby's volume overwhelm Tyron Woodley to where Tyron can't even counter effectively? That part I have trouble believing, because Burns was able to keep from getting blasted because he dropped Tyron, hurt Tyron early, and then did it again. He gained Tyron's respect because he can knock you the hell out. Remember, Burns had just had that one-punch KO of Damian Maia just before that. Colby won't have that type of respect from Woodley. He'll have to gain it through volume, and I'd imagine there's only so much Woodley is willing to stand there and get outboxed by someone with slower hands than him before he just takes off on the guy. I don't think Woodley's too shot of a fighter to do that. So, I don't expect Colby to box the whole time, the way that he did against Kamaru. Why would he? Woodley can hurt him, and his hands are fast, even if his punch volume isn't there. At worst, he's like an inactive Yoel Romero who will just kind of stand there and look at you and defend for a while, and then explode unexpectedly. Colby might do some of that jab, 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 cross, boxing, and he is a southpaw. I shouldn't forget to mention that. But he's going to want to take Woodley down or push him up against the cage, and I think that controlled wrestling and making Tyron have to deal with that pressure wrestling and, an occasional takedown and just push against the cage and faking a takedown, all that stuff, that would be the remedy here. Even if Colby isn't doing a ton of damage, it'll be enough to win him a couple rounds. And over time, I think that Woodley's moments in the stand-up will become less scary due to fatigue. I am going with Colby winning via decision as being the most likely scenario here. I think that Woodley winning via knockout or stoppage is the second most likely outcome. But Colby winning via decision, to me, at this time, is by far the most likely. I don't see how Woodley wins this one by decision. He very well could if this was Woodley 3 years ago. Come on, he won decisions against Kelvin Gastelum and Wonderboy. That just doesn't appear to be the Woodley that we have here. So I love the fight, even if it is coming a couple years late. This should tell us a lot about whether Woodley should still even be fighting. It'll also be Colby's second best opponent by far. Better than Maia, better than RDA at 170, better than Old Lawler. A win here would be the biggest win of Colby's career. I can't wait to see how this plays out, but let me know your thoughts. How does this fight affect the 170 landscape? Does the winner here necessarily get the shot versus the Usman versus Burns winner? Does Jorge Masvidal just leapfrog everyone with a BMF Part 2 win over Nate Diaz, who just basically pops up only on his terms and isn't really playing any of these divisional ranking games? Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.